afternoon, everyone, on this sunny spring October afternoon. We're very privileged and blessed for you to come and join us today for this absolutely gripping session. I know not everyone shares my excitement about this topic, but me and my co-panelists, we are very passionate and very excited about this because this is such a topical issue at the moment, and I think it's going to affect a lot of us directly in our back pockets. So just to high level, we'll try not to bore you, and I mean, we also had a discussion before not to get too legalistic or too academic on this whole thing. So just to maybe to give you a little bit of context, is let's break it down. So the next slide, please, Helena. So first of all is FATF, it's been written about a lot in the popular press for the past couple of weeks or months. And FATF stands for the Financial Action Task Force, and they are the global money laundering and terrorist financing watchdog. And they are an independent international body that's been setting international standards that aim to prevent illegal activities and the harm they cause to society. And they're also a policy-making body that has got the necessary political will to bring about national legislative and regulatory reforms. So there's over 200 countries and jurisdictions committed to implementing them, and they've developed the FATF standards, which is high-level 40 standards that those 200 jurisdictions are trying to adhere to. So they review money laundering and terrorist financing techniques and continuously strengthen these standards to address such risks, such as legislation of virtual assets, which have spread as cryptocurrency as that gained popularity. Obviously as well, and that brings us to where we are, they monitor countries to ensure that they implement the FATF standards fully and effectively, and then they do hold countries to account if they do not apply or comply. Then the Financial Intelligence Center, it's a legislative statutory body that's been created in terms of the legislation, being the Financial Intelligence Center Act. I mean, I'm sure all of you on the call have been exposed to where's your KYC documents, and that is the legislation that started that whole thing. So the FIC are there to intend to make the financial system completely intolerant to abuse, to money laundering, as well as terrorist financing, as well as proliferation terrorist financing as well. And they do this by working towards fulfilling its mandate in assisting and identifying the proceeds of crime, combating money laundering, and then the financing of terrorism, as well as proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, as I've mentioned before as well. And then I'm going to hand over to the next slide. Is my learned colleague, Madalene.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Ronel, for the introduction. Really appreciate it. Okay, so as Harry said, we're not going to bore you with many acronyms, etc., but there's a few acronyms, obviously, that's quite important. And I'm going to speak on SAMLIT, which stands for South African Anti-Money Laundering Integrated Task Force. Now, SAMLIT was launched in South Africa in December 2019, and it's the first public-private partnership between the banking sector and government regulatory authorities. And they aim at collaborating and coordinating in order to assist in the combating of the financial crime, money laundering, and terrorist financing. Now, SAMLIT has done a lot of work through the last 15 months. They've really worked, especially after the report came out, and they knew that there were a lot of work to be done on that as well. So they issued a report that was based on a period of review of January 2021 up to March 2022. And in the report, obviously, there's a few heartwarming facts, like, for instance, the Financial Intelligence Center has seen its financial intelligence, which they receive from various accountable institutions on a daily basis, assisted them in recovering around 5 billion in criminal assets during the 2021-22 financial year, which is quite a bit. So quite impressive as well. And many inspections from the regulator, like the PA, Prudential Authority, the FIC, as well as the FSCA, resulted in financial penalties to being imposed to accountable institutions not complying fully to the value of more than 41 million rand, which is also quite impressive for 1 year. So they have done quite a bit of work. Then the next issue is on the National Treasury. Now, the National Treasury, an important thing, committee that is formed out of that is the Standing Committee on Finance. And in a meeting on the 11th October about the new General Laws Amendment Act that they are looking to implement, there was quite a few upset people around the proposed mandatory registration of nonprofit organizations, and as well as the inadequate public comment period. Now, obviously, things happened very quickly. They had to put it out for comment quite quickly because they need to do government needs to implement a lot of aspects to avoid us being greylisted. But again, people are public, and the private sector is incredibly upset about that. So where that's concerned, I can also mention that the JSE is also really concerned about the new amendments to the Financial Intelligence Center Act around ultimate beneficial owner, which is going to result in having a lot of a great effect on some of their listed companies, and will probably result in more companies being delisted. So they are very concerned about the UBO.
Madalene,
yes.
Thank you very much for that. But then ultimately is you need to ask yourself the question is we keep on using this term grey listing. Helena, if we may ask, can you move to the next slide? And Marita, would you care to enlighten us on that topic then a little bit further?
Thank you, Harry. Yes, so on grey listing, maybe I'll just take one step back and not tell what grey listing is, but how do you get there? So grey listing does not happen overnight. It happens normally where jurisdiction is aware or have been made aware that they are, that they're not achieving what of the expected standard required of them, and to not achieving the expected standard required of them to counter money laundering, the terrorist funding, and the proliferation financing, and that they need to do something about it. And either one, the do is either not happening quickly enough or only partly. So it creates a bit of a external impression that either you're lacking commitment, or in our case, maybe our biggest struggle is follow through. So I actually I think it was the guy from, now I can't remember the guy's name, I apologize, but from Momentum that actually used the description of being issued a yellow card. A nice sporting one for us in South Africa to be able to use that. So, and I'm going to use it here. So we're basically getting like a yellow card, and we can possibly get sent to the sin bin. The only difference with this is that there's no bench time. There's not a 10-minute, you're out and then you can come back. There's a lot of hard work that needs to be put in to be able to get you back to so that you can actually play with the other guys. So being greylisted means that the jurisdiction is under increased monitoring by your external regulators and the FATF, they are increased monitoring, making sure that we have to actively work with them, basically hand-holding, trying to get us back on track. So I think a few of the challenges in part with South Africa is that we're struggling to develop and adapt fast enough to keep up with international standards. I'm just thinking about the EU fifth directive and the sixth directive that's coming up. to keep up with international standards on prevention of financial crime, legislation and regulations. And we are starting to become a haven for money launderers and terrorists. And as I mentioned earlier, secondly, the biggest problem with us is lack of follow through. And the reason for that is an extract from the FATF Mutual Evaluation Report. Actually, I'm just going to read that section because it actually just sets that part out. And it says, the proactive identification and investigation of money laundering networks and professional enablers is not really occurring in South Africa. Most money laundering convictions relate to fraud cases, and there are fewer investigations and successful prosecutions relating to other high risk crimes. So it looks like we are constantly on the back foot and we are always caught sleeping. And I think this actually needs to change. And I'm hoping that this is a wake-up call for us. So greylisting has a potential serious implications for the economy, from increasing the cost of financial transactions with the rest of the world. It's going to be harder to do business, which is in the current situation where we are, we can't really afford that. So, we need to work on that. And I think the implications for our integration into the international economy is clear. Some people have compared greylisting to the loss of investment grade credit rating. I'm not there yet, but it's definitely going to have a major impact. And then there are similarities with our counterparts. That view is one of the biggest ones are reputational risk. And that's the external reputation, that how are we going to be viewed? When money is coming from South Africa, there's going to be question marks. They're going to, where does it come from?
Marita, no, I do agree with you. That's 100% correct. I like your analogy of the yellow card, but then would you kindly enlighten us, what would be the analogy then pertaining to the blacklisting that FATF has also got up their sleeve? Would that be like a red card then, or what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I think that would be a red card. I mean, if you look at who are the countries that are being blacklisted by the FATF, you look at North Korea and Iran, and I mean those countries. I'm sure there are a few things that are probably good in those countries. I'm not, but there is a lot of bad things that are, being associated with them. And that's the external view. And that's the view, not just from some of the Western countries, or it's across the world, that those countries, have a very negative view. People have a very negative view towards them. And we need to definitely try to avoid that. And we need to be careful not to be on a slippery slope, because we always just seem a bit slow on getting going when it needs to be done.
It is quite frustrating.
I just want to add to what Marita is saying, is that I read that the CEO of Business Leadership said a few days ago that the thing is, we knew for a long time what is not working. But it takes so long to get the laws in place and the execution thereof in place. And I think that's quite a bit of a problem. And referring to the blacklist, I think, yes, definitely a red card. I don't think North Korea or Iran is going to come off the blacklist anytime soon. So you will not get back.
And then next slide, please, Eliana. That leads us to the list of the countries that's currently on the FATF grey list then. And as you can see, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, and please forgive me for that, but I do not like to believe that South Africa would want to be on a list like that.
I agree with you, Harry. I mean, and I'm not talking about South Africa, but normally, I mean, everybody wants to be associated with excellence. I mean, that's like a normal human thing. And I think you can actually take that through with everything. You don't want to be seen as not doing enough. Yeah, so
no, it is quite concerning, and I mean, it goes without saying, is Marita and Madalene, and that's why we managed to convince you to join us on this webinar, is you would like to be associated with excellence. And as you can see as well, is something that's very contentious at the moment is the European Union have implemented an anti-money laundering blacklist based on the FATF grey list. And it should not be confused with the EU. The EU have got a tax blacklist as well. This is a completely separate one. And initially it was a complete copy of the FATF grey list, but then the EU tried being different, and then they introduced their own methodology in 2018 and revised it in 2020. But it's still basically a copy and paste of the FATF grey list.
Yeah, so sorry, Harry, I'm interrupting.
No, not at all. Please, I think you definitely know more than I do about that.
Yeah, so I won't say more, but what I want to say is that with the EU AML blacklist, the thing is, if you move to the FATF grey list, the chances of being moved to the EU blacklist is probably 100%. So even if you do get removed from either one, does not necessarily mean that you're going to be moved from the other one. So you'll still have challenges along the way.
No, definitely. Sadly enough, that is true. That is true. Next slide, please. And then is both of you touched on the possible effects of grey listing. I maybe just need to precursor this. Is please note for the purposes of all the audience, is we by no stretch of the imagination are either one of us qualified economists or financial experts that can see into the future. So this is just high level things that we've come across, that we read, and it's just purely our opinions.
Thank you for that, Harry. Yeah, so the possible effects of grey listing, as you said, we're not economists, but it will definitely have an economic impact. A lot of institutions that are going to be that's going to be form part of Schedule 1 as accountable institutions. There's going to be a lot of probably compliance costs that's going to be involved for them, and that normally rolls over to the end user eventually. And the end users are, it's already difficult for them. So those type of things we need to consider, and we need to make sure that we are solution orientated and look at it from all sides on how this is going to impact us.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. And I mean, obviously, if you look at the other countries that's currently on the grey list, or have been lucky to be able to remove themselves from the grey list, and the International Monetary Fund has done a study where they said in a rough, because obviously as well as I would like to believe that South Africa's financial system is a little bit more complicated systems in comparison with the countries on the currently on the grey list. But they said it's average. You can expect an average decline in capital inflow of 7.6% of GDP, a decrease in foreign direct investment of at least 3% of GDP, and a decrease in portfolio inflows of 2.9% of GDP. And then obviously it would also possibly impact and impair the economy's link to the global financial system, raise the cost of capital, create an additional disincentive for offshore companies to deal with South Africa. And I think currently, as we stand here with the economic and political situation where we are, we cannot afford additional barriers to the economy. Madalene, I would like to hear what your thoughts and views on this.
Yes, well, I've got an interesting view that I picked up from S&P, and their view, and I quote, is as follows, especially related to banks. Based on our observations in neighboring countries where they have operations, we expect South African banks will likely maintain their corresponding banking relationships. Large South African banks might also leverage their presence in Mauritius to raise and deploy foreign exchange funding. Mauritius and Botswana were removed from the FATF grey listing in 2021, October. Despite some reputational risk and potentially higher cost of compliance, we believe the implications of grey listing for the banking sector are likely to be muted, which is an interesting view because everyone is really concerned about what will happen from a international funding and international payments point of view.
Yeah, Madalene, on that, I think the muted view is a lot of our larger banks have done quite a lot. They've have quite a lot of experience with regards to setting in place, the requirements are set in place for them. So I think from there, yes, it will have an impact on them, but it will be much less than the other new accountable institutions that are not yet at that level, and maybe not really understanding of what is required, and not. I mean, from previous experience. At one of the banks I used to do a lot of work with, they had a lot of international input, and that actually put them on the forefront because they had that guidance, international guidance, and they knew exactly what was required and so on. So I think that actually helped a lot.
No, Marita, I agree with you 100%, especially seen in light of the fact where with the polls that we launched in the beginning, where everyone said the banks and the insurers are going to struggle the most. It's actually not just them. As you said, it's rightly so. It's all the new accountable institutions, and they will need to level up their levels of compliance to be aligned with the banks at this stage. And I also think all South African businesses and individuals currently using foreign bank accounts and other financial services will definitely, as you've mentioned as well, face heightened due diligence costs. So because we would be on the grey listing, then other accountable institutions in other foreign jurisdictions, especially the correspondent banks, will also decide and categorize South Africa as higher risk and apply more stringent oversight then on the South African jurisdiction and individuals.
Okay, I think if I can interject here, it's a very interesting conversation, and I just want to go to some of the conversations on the chat quickly to the panelists. So if I can go to Matt's question, he says, if I can go to his second question first, if I can ask, where is you call it FATF, located, and which government international body are they answerable to? How and why do they have so much power, and who backs them? Who are these people? If you can, maybe Harry, if I can direct that question to you first.
I'll try my best to answer. I know FATF is actually located in Paris, but they are supported by various regional specialists. I know in South Africa we are subject to the Marita, Madalene, I'll need your help on that. It's the ESA. I'm going to pass it on to one of you. You would know better than I do.
Yeah, we just call it short Isamaleg. It sounds like Zamalek.
It just gives you a different kind of hangover. So it's an international body that is basically kind of looking at all these things and implementing grey listing, blacklisting, and it seems like a lot of foreign important bodies are looking to them for guidance. If I then can go to the first of Matt's questions is, why does being grey listed increase the cost of borrowing financial services? I think that I don't know who it is, but SCM answered being grey listed will most likely not affect our credit rating, but might cause the rand to weaken, inflation to spike, and higher interest rates. And you did allude to some possible negative effects. Maybe, Madalene, if I can ask you to answer this one.
Sure, I wouldn't be able to answer it in detail because we have no idea how it would affect. You would see in the other countries that it's you know, we can't actually answer that at the moment. I don't know, Marita, you've got something to add there?
Yeah, I
Very
think
specific.
Yeah, so I think with the announcement, there will definitely be a weakening of the rand. And we've seen that through, and the reason I'm saying that is you notice that with big announcements that happen. So whether it will be permanent and whether it can maybe bounce back quickly, that we'll have to see. Is there anything that I've missed? Oh, sorry.
No, I think that's good. I think, Craig, thanks for that link. Craig is giving everyone a link, and then Matt, it will be interesting to go and read that. So another interesting comment from our audience is about what do we think? You know, how do you think the state capture in Durban will affect the conference that will be held in 2023 to decide whether SA will be greylisted? I don't know who wants to take that. I'll ask any panelists to come on mic and see if they want to answer that question.
I'll try and give it my best shot. The thing is the report that Madalene referred to with the SAMLEC joint forces, and the fact that they've managed to recoup 5 billion rand in the previous financial year, I think that would or should be mitigating reasons why we shouldn't be greylisted. And I would like to believe that the government would be arguing that the commitment is there from their side. But the harsh reality is as we speak, the FATF evaluators are in South Africa again. So the fact that the Indaba is only planned for next year, I very much doubt, and that's just my humble opinion, very much doubt whether that will influence whether or not we will be greylisted. Madalene, I see you're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's too much to do in too little time. And if you look at how slow the implementation of the legislation is, and then it still must be executed. But I do believe there's a glimmer of that you know, if you look at the other countries that has been greylisted, our banking sector, our regulations, our Reserve Bank, one of the best regulators in the world, there is definitely a glimmer that would probably, hopefully, save us from the yellow card at the moment. And that's my opinion, but I stand to be corrected next year.
So, I mean, if you look at the press, it looks like there's an 85% likelihood of us being greylisted. So it doesn't seem as if this path we're on going to be stopped. And it seems like this seems to be quite inevitable. You know, I don't think there's a sentiment. Kim is saying that she doesn't believe that the government will do enough for this to be stopped. I don't believe our government will do enough to stop us from being greylisted prior to the 2023 conference. Now, my perspective has always been, you've mentioned it, our Reserve Bank is quality. Our JSE is one of the best exchanges, if not the best exchange. And it feels to me as if we're a highly regulated country. And so maybe, Marita, you can just expand on this for me, because you've mentioned that it's about follow through. Are you saying that we actually have enough legislation in place? It just has to be enforced? Or will there a whole host of new legislation be necessary for this?
I think the biggest challenge is when it comes to the convictions. We're not seeing enough political will to, you know, to actually the people that are supposed to be an example, that are not being an example, that are not being convicted, they're not being, you know, sent to jail. I guess that's the word on the street. That's how they feel. And that actually is the biggest problem. And our courts, from my experience when I practiced, is that the courts are overworked. So there's not a lot of resources actually with them as well, because if you schedule a court date, you're looking at probably another year if you're lucky, and that's just for a normal thing. What about these bigger cases?
So if you think about it, if the bottleneck is actually in our legal system, more laws is not going to actually help. That is not where the solution lies. Then it becomes an enforcing what we do have. Would that be a correct assessment?
It's not just the legal system, Ronel. It's also the fact that you do require specialist skills, knowledge, training for people to prosecute and to successfully prosecute these type of crimes in a court of law. I mean, Marita and Madalene, I would like to hear your opinion on that as well.
Definitely. Sorry. Yeah. On that, yes, I think, Ronel, some of the laws are just being amended now by the General Laws Amendment. So they're amending FICA, Trust Property Control, and a few others to assist. So the laws need some tweaking. For instance, with FICA, like I mentioned just now, it's the UBO, ultimate beneficial owner, needed to be expanded because there's much confusion around that in the sector. So I think our laws are fine. I agree with everyone that at the end of the day, it's all about, especially what Marita said just now, it's about execution. There isn't enough people getting convicted. Although, you know, and the wheels of justice turn incredibly slow in South Africa. And I think that does contribute to it.
Yeah, and that definitely hampers it. But I also think the thing is, everybody has a role to play. So from my experience is that normally a lot of the institutions, they don't know how to properly report. So the information that's provided to the FIC is normally not the good quality, and that also hampers the entire process because it's a back and forth trying to get more information, and then eventually the person that needs to investigate maybe also doesn't have the skill, and then it just falls flat.
Absolutely. I would ask to go to the next slide, because then we can address the issues of what is currently happening in South Africa. Madalene, I think if you can quickly go through this slide, this is just high level, a comparative. How did we get here? It's quite insightful. And then we can discuss the as-is situation from a legislation perspective, where we currently stand. Thanks.
Okay, so basically from a FATF perspective, our first mutual evaluation took place in 2003, and then we had another one again in 2009. And subsequent to 2009, there was also changes to our FICA legislation specifically, and that's where the FICA Amendment Act was born, I think, in 2017. So that's with our next evaluation after 2009 was in 2019, and they visited us obviously for more than nearly a month. And the report was issued in 2021. So there was quite a bit of time between the visit and the report. I suppose it's also due to COVID. Everything just took a little bit longer. So the report of 2021 analyzed the level of compliance with the 40 FATF recommendations and the level of the effectiveness of South Africans' AML and CFT regime, and provides recommendations on how the system should be strengthened. So with the report, we were fully compliant with 3 recommendations that you can see on the slide, which is really few, and largely compliant with 17, but we were significantly non-compliant with 20 recommendations, which is quite a bit, and that's why all the changes to legislation needs to take place. So Harry, you can, I suppose,
can we go to the next slide, please? Then, as you can see, the current legislation at the moment that we do have, specifically to strengthen the anti-money laundering or AML and CFT regime is currently FICA and POC-DATARA. Marita, would you enlighten us to what FICA is currently requiring from accountable institutions?
Thank you, Harry. Yeah, so currently the FICA Amendment Act is requiring that there's a risk management compliance program put in place, and that the accountable institution is their whole compliance structure should be a risk-based approach. So that includes, I'm just going to run through it quickly, is to establish and verify the identity of your clients or customers. Who are you dealing with? To understand the nature and the purpose of the transactions, record keeping, which is important. And that's not just of the customer, but of transactions, the identity of your, to identify and properly manage your PEPs and your politically prominent influential persons, screening against the sanctions watch lists. So the FIC has a recommendation of who you need to screen against, but that is the least you do normally. But that also needs to be, before you do as little as possible, one of the things you need to look at is look at the risk that you're operating in. If you need to do more, there's other lists that you need to screen against, and you need to take that as an accountable institution into consideration. Then reporting, we're looking at your cash transaction reporting. Currently, we're looking at 25,000, which are actually 24,999. But that's imminently going to change. I think in 3 weeks, that's going to change to 49,999 Rand. So that will change. I think that will definitely lessen the burden, and which is a good change. And then your suspicious reporting. And as I mentioned earlier, with regards to your suspicious reporting, it's the quality of the report. You need to look at, you almost need to look at, okay, what information do I need to provide if I need to report? And that should actually be the information that you collect in the beginning. Not getting as little as possible and trying to fill the gaps later.
And you just to tick the boxes. That's absolutely right, Marita. I agree.
You actually need to look at the end point and then work yourself back. And then your internal processes need to be documented. You need to appoint a compliance officer, and a compliance officer meaning someone that's able to look after your compliance department.
Yeah, not just the person that's sitting around looking the most bored.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's training, which is super, super important. I think, you can't just roll out flat training for everyone from level 0 to your board level, because it's not the same. So you need to think about who needs the training and what type of training is required. I'm absolutely passionate about that. And then one of the other things is a risk assessment, although it's not specifically mentioned, but it's a risk assessment. You need to conduct a risk assessment in your business to understand what's happening there. And then that will actually just help the rest to put the rest together nicely. Yeah, and then source of funds for transactions. Yeah, that's currently what's required. Over to you, Madalene.
Okay. Yes. I think if I can, Marita, if I can take it from here. I see my connection is unstable, so maybe I can just, we are a governance company, and we have Harry and the team as our compliance team. So maybe can we draw the link between what is happening in grey listing? What is it that the board should know?
Madalene.
Yes, so I am going to the next slide, or are we still on POC-DATARA?
Now, will you answer Ronald's question first? Although actually we'll answer a question at the next slide. Yes, happy.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to quickly speak about Poktatara. We don't want to run out of time. So yes, that's a big word, but it actually means the protection of constitutional democracy against terrorist and related activities. Short Poktatara for anyone that in the industry. And Poktatara is there to introduce measures to prevent and combat terrorist and related activities, and to provide offences of terrorism, etc. So that there's many offences in the Act set out, and it also provides a mechanism to comply with the United Nations Security Council resolutions, which is very, very important. And the banks definitely struggle, or if all accountable institutions struggle with this one, because it's much easier assessing your money laundering risk than to assess your terrorist financing risk. And I think most banks have always struggled with that, because it's you know, you must really have good automated screening systems in place to be able to pick it up and to be able to be in a position to give proper reports to the FIC as you would need to do within the FIC regulations. So two important sections I just want to quickly discuss on Poktatara is Section 4. Section 4 prohibits any person from dealing with property that is associated with acts of terrorism, with persons who carry out acts of terrorism, with persons or organizations that carry out acts of terrorism, or with entities that are sanctioned. So that's the important thing. You're not allowed to deal with them. And that's why screening of your whole entire client base, especially from a banking perspective on a daily basis, is crucial, because people can arrive on the list the one day and move from the list the next day. The lists are very dynamic, and you need to make sure you know what's on those lists all the time. And then also, as I said just now, in terms of Section 28A, you need to report any such activity to the FIC. And then Section 25 of Poktatara states that the President must give notice by proclamation in the Gazette in respect of any entity that has been designated by the UNSC, which is the United Nations Security Council, in order to combat or prevent terrorist and related activities. So the above mentioned conditions are met in respect of sanction lists, as I said, issued pursuant to the UNSCR 1267, sorry, it's a mouthful, and successor resolutions. And up to date lists can be accessed via a link on the UN website. So there's a lot of companies that provide that service in terms of sanction lists, but a company can also download it from the UN sanctions website and integrate it with your systems. Yes, so that's on that. I think we can go to the next slide. Harry?
Yes, so as you can see, there's currently quite a lot of very contentious proposed draft legislation out there. Least but is the general laws for anti-money laundering and terrorist and combating terrorist financing amendment bill. I mean, obviously it's been discussed by SCOPA, the national in Parliament recently, and they said no, there wasn't enough consultation for the public, and they need to go back to the drawing board. And now the consultation period has been postponed until I think the 25th of October, which is next week. But this amendment bill is planning to amend issues like the Trust Property Control Act, the Non-Profit Organization Act, where they want all non-profit organizations to collaborate with law enforcement, record keeping and the reporting requirements, including the control structures of office bearers' access to information. Although I saw briefly yesterday that National Treasury has abandoned this blanket requirement for the registration of all non-profit organizations to combat money laundering and terrorist financing in favor of a more targeted approach, which is really good news for the non-profit organizations. The registration requirement for all non-NPOs under the current proposed amendment bill will be deemed to be too broad. So they are in the process of changing that. Then obviously the big one as well is the Financial Intelligence Center Act will also be changing, as Madalene and Marita alluded to, is the definition of beneficial owner and related and influential persons and public officials will also be changing. So Schedule 3A will be amended to replace the domestic prominent influential person with a domestic politically exposed person. And then there's also the foreign politically exposed person. And then something just to quickly mention is on Schedule 3B is a new insertion into the legislation. And that means where any prominent influential person is an individual who holds during the previous 12 months the position of chairperson of the board of directors, chairperson of the audit committee, executive officer, or chief financial officer of a company as defined in the Companies Act, who provides goods or services to an organ of state, and the annual transactional value of the goods or services will be still be gazetted. That is quite concerning. So anyone doing business with the state, you will be exposed to additional due diligence processes by financial institutions and accountable institutions.
So, Harry, if I can interject there, because we're running a little bit out of time. I mean, that if we can pause almost there, that means, I mean, a lot of private companies provide services to the state or will become an accountable institution. So what is it that these boards, these executives must look at? What is it they must do? If you can, and I think the ladies also has mentioned a lot of things. If you can almost like give us a bit of or do you need to first do an assessment? You know, how as a private organization or as an NPC, what do I do after this webinar is finished? What do you suggest?
I would recommend first of all is contact us. We'll need to do an assessment and see where you are. And not only that, this proposed legislation is still in the bill format, and we don't know when and if it will be accepted and approved by the president before the deadline of next year February, when the FATF is making their final decision on whether or not we're going to be greylisted. I would recommend is contact us, and we can definitely do an assessment for you, and we can definitely help you to strengthen if it needs be. And as Ronel mentioned in the beginning as well, is we can also be proactive. We can do an assessment, we can provide you with an opinion, and we can look at your current processes, and we can assist and advise you and help you to implement sufficient processes and procedures to mitigate the risk of this.
So it's basically, thanks for Harry for that. I mean, it does seem as if this is quite a lot of legislation. It's quite technical. It is very specific. I think the banks are probably going to be more equipped because they have teams of compliance and people. But I do find that even in your listed, you know, a lot of companies are not necessarily equipped to deal with this. So your ordinary risk committee will have to be informed, your social and ethics committee if they look after your compliance, and your boards and your directors. And I mean, a lot of directors are not necessarily legal or compliance people, so they will really need to understand what do we do, and from each individual company they might have to decide to wait and see. Although it seems as if even if the government do not implement all of these measures and we're in time for the deadline, that it's going to be necessary to comply with all of these measures in any way at some point in time. So it does seem as if a more proactive approach will be prudent. Marita, maybe if you can maybe give me your view.
Yeah, thank you, Ronel. Yeah, I would definitely say proactive it just makes it easier for you as a business. You know, not to leave things for the last minute. It normally causes a lot of scramble, trying to get everything ready, especially you know, because once you get listed as a accountable institution, the regulator can step up and come do a review and see whether you're compliant or not. So it's important, and there's a lot of yeah. So it's important to, you know, to be proactive and see where you can do it You know, get yourself ready, even if it's just to have a conversation to see where you are. It's important. And then, yeah, so, yeah, that's, I'm wrapping up now.
Yeah. No, and the regulators,
Yeah.
they aren't shy
No,
to
thanks
issue
for
fines
that.
and penalties either. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I was worrying what those fines were being used for. Sorry, Marita.
Yeah, so sorry, yeah, so Harry's right. You know, there's a lot of fines and penalties that are starting to come through. I know that Nedbank got fined like 35 million a month ago. But we are still lucky with regards to penalties, that we don't get the penalties that are placed upon like the US companies and the US banks and the European companies and banks. I mean, they are looking at a couple of 100 million. Our fines are at this stage small, but it might become even larger because the stick is becoming, you know, trying to get us back on track. The stick is going to become bigger. So
and heavier. Absolutely, yes, agreed.
You can understand.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say to Laurie, she's welcome to put her question on the chat, and if we don't get to answer it, because we have 3 minutes left. So maybe Harry, if you can just take 30 seconds and wrap this for me. We might not get through all the slides, and that's okay. We will send it out to the team, but maybe you can just take a minute and wrap this for me to say, guys, where to now?
Firstly, is thank you very much for your time. Is as you can see, me as well as my learned colleagues, is we can talk about this topic for the next 3 weeks non-stop. So definitely, as I mentioned, we can help you. We can be proactive. We can help you to implement, to do a review, do an assessment, do a gap analysis. If there's certain systems that needs reviewing from our side, we can also assist with that. And I would strongly recommend be proactive and contact us, as we can definitely help you to be prepared. Because I think the chances of this happening is very, very high.
Absolutely. Okay. So I would just like to say, if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact Harry. He's very happy. You can see he's a very chatty guy. He loves chatting to people. So contact him, talk about your organizations, your question. You know, for us, it's all about reaching our objective of living in a society fueled by ethical and well-governed corporate citizens. Then don't forget to register for our next webinar on the 3rd of November. We normally have these once a month, but this one has been slipped in because we had a lot of requests for these. We will also post this video on YouTube if you would like to watch it again. And then next year, we will have our first one in February. It's going to be about marketing and what the board should know about marketing. What are the questions that you should ask? Because normally when we get to marketing, people are like, oh, you know, how many followers do we have? Which is much more. It's about engagement. And then we are going to talk about cybersecurity next year. But next one, 3 November, it's with our partners from the UK, GWCI, all about your third parties. And it links into this conversation very nicely because it's all about reputational risk. So with that, I'd like to thank Marita for your knowledge and your input. Madalene, it's been very, very insightful. Harry, I can definitely see that this is a specialist area, and I really thank you for your time and preparation for this. And everyone on call, thanks so much. We really appreciate it, and we hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.